Well, if you are here, you are hopefully intending to talk about partnerships and community collaboration. We are not going to Vegas, so if you're on the Vegas flight, you need to exit. No, joking. My name is Desmarais. I was so pleased to introduce myself to you all a little bit earlier. I work for a partnership program. Actually, we're not an organization, we're just a program that collaborates with federal agencies to provide training and facilitation around partnership and collaboration practices. So I usually am working with an audience of folks who work in the federal government. Think Park Service, Forest Service, BLM, Army Corps, NOAA, all those folks. Those are the people that I'm usually working with. Good news, partnership is not rocket science. And so the concepts that I'll be teaching you are also not specific to the conservation community that I typically serve. And I was so honored to be asked to come and share them with all of you. I like to be interactive in my sessions, and so I'm actually going to encourage us to start with, there's the title slide, start with the beautiful sunflower and follow that with some crowdsourcing. I was really pleased to receive from the foundation a summary of some of what you shared on your registration forms. Rarely have I been so well prepared to come in and talk to an audience as I was for this event. And so I have some ideas about what you might be curious about, but I want to hear more about that right now. So that's what we're going to do first, is a little bit of, crowdsourcing. What are your questions about partnership and collaboration? And I'm just going to have you shout them out, and then I'll repeat them back as I hear them, so we don't have to run the mic around.
How do you navigate conflict with partners?
Oh, yes. How to navigate conflict between partners. Thank you. What else?
How to find partners.
Mm-hmm. How to find those partners. How to find. How to also define.
What makes it official? If it's like, oh, we work together, we have a similar goal.
Mm-hmm. I might call that alignment, if that's okay. What else?
How do you foster relationships with all your partners?
Say that one more time. How to foster relationships with all your partners.
What are the benefits of having partners?
Benefits of having partners. Yes.
Increasing partner engagement.
Increasing and maintaining partner engagement. Mm-hmm.
How to get your partners to honor the timelines they've already agreed to.
How to get partners to honor the timeline that you already agreed to, accountability. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How to convince a partner to change the plan instead of just dropping. Like, how do we adapt that program instead of just letting it go and say it wasn't great?
So how to convince a partner to change a plan, not just and adapt, and not just drop it. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I did biology. That little symbol means change. It's my shorthand. Yes?
How to effectively engage potential partners.
How to effectively engage potential partners.
How do you pull new potential partners into the conversation?
How to pull them into the conversation. Why partner? Why would you or would you not engage in a new partnership? Who gets credit and recognition? That's a good conversation to have.
Follow up with that, how do you move from competition to collaboration?
How do you move from competition to collaboration? How important are clearly defined roles and expectations? Very. But that might also be something that evolves. Anything else? Wow, what a great list of questions. So what I would like to propose is to offer up to you in the next 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, some of the most kind of tried and true go-to partnership frameworks and ideas that we teach and that we use. And as we do that, to work our way through some of these questions. We may not be able to get all these questions. If we don't, please come and find me. In between times, I'll be in the partner pathway as well tomorrow. And I'm always happy, pick up the phone, send me an email. I'm always happy to talk about partnership, but I will do my best. And you can help hold me accountable because now we have a list. So let me just gather up my materials over here. The first one, so the common themes that we heard from your registration, information, finding partners and getting started, very similar to what you've all thrown out here, right? Building and sustaining partnerships, how do we do that? Managing competition and conflict. And evaluating and communicating partnership impact, because conveying that partnership impact, that collective impact is also what helps you find partners, gather resources, and make a convincing grant application. So here are those concepts. I teach a 6-month online course on partnership that covers 22 competencies. We only have 25 minutes, so I handpicked a few that I thought you might most enjoy. And the partnership life cycle is the one that's right in the middle. We'll get to that one in a few slides. We'll also be touching on some of these other concepts. And by the way, in case you missed it, not only the recordings, but also all of the presentations that you are seeing here will be posted in PDF format. No need to write down all the details. Come and get them later. All right, especially this one. Don't try to write this down. Okay, this is the continuum of collaboration. If you know there's another group called the IAP2 Institute. Oh, boy, we're going to get it wrong today. Anyway, public participation. That's what they do. So they have a similar spectrum, but I really like this one. So what are we looking at here is that, I'm going to preface this, so I know I've distracted you with all this detail, but look at me for just a minute. We use collaboration very freely in casual conversation for any time we're getting together and doing stuff, right? In the partnership profession, it has a really precise meaning. In the partnership profession, collaboration means joint decision making. It means hand in hand, deciding what we're going to do, sharing resources, figuring it out, problem solving, okay? But partnership has many other forms, and it's not that one is better than another. So the reason I share this with you is because it has been one of the most powerful frameworks when I've done training, because simply having clarity in your own mind and organization and with your partners about what level of collaboration are we seeking, what level of engagement are we seeking, can help you get ahead of hurt feelings and misaligned expectations, okay? So partnership generally is happening somewhere in these groups over here on the side, but oftentimes we are starting over here in the competition realm, right? So maybe you are here and you would like to move somewhere else. Perhaps you would like to move to at least coexistence where you're not actively competing. Maybe you want to move into a place where you are informing each other and staying in the loop about what your respective organizations are doing. That's communication, right? Or maybe you're trying to get something done together and you would like to be cooperating in a way. Usually this is around more discrete projects or time-bound activities. We're going to cooperate to get this done, okay? Maybe you're moving into coordination. This is walking shoulder to shoulder down the road together, right? So we're each kind of independently making our decisions and doing our programs, but we are coordinating in the delivery of that. Or maybe we're coordinating different parts of a program on which we are working together. And then, as I mentioned, you can get all the way over here to collaboration. You have probably noticed the arrows moving in opposite directions. Okay, so it is true that if you want to move in this direction, it's going to take probably a little more time, attention, resources, and building of trust. I like to think of trust like the pearl in a clam. Trust, really, let me say this, partnership is all about relationship. It's relationship building, that's what it is. And in relationship building, the way that we build trust is we say what we're gonna do, and then we do what we say, right? I'm not always the best at that, but we can strive. And trust building is like that pearl in that every time there's contact, every time you communicate, every time that you work through an issue, that you talk and have that tough conversation, right, you're building another layer of that trust, of that relationship. And so it does take some time, and it takes multiple iterations and communications to get that through. So we are increasing trust as we're moving in this direction, which then requires us to give up some control. If you want to truly be here in collaborative leadership, you're going to have to give up some control and let that other partner come in and be part of that decision-making conversation, right? That seems fairly obvious. So think about where are you with your partner, maybe one of your partners, on this continuum right now? Where are you with this other organization on this continuum? Is that where you want or need to be? I see a no. Okay, so would you be willing to share an example? Because that would be fantastic. If you are willing to share, don't tell us who the partner is if you're not comfortable.
It's
Intangible, okay. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so maybe a little too fresh to talk about. But so, an example might be, we've been in this kind of coexisting, communicating space. Maybe we're talking to each other every now and then. But now suddenly an opportunity comes up where if we were cooperating or coordinating, we could actually accomplish more, both with our respective missions and then for whatever it is we're trying to do together in community, right? So you might need to then invest a little bit in building that relationship to move yourself along that collaboration continuum. Anyone have any thoughts or comments about this before I roll on?
What about hostile competition?
What about hostile competition? Yeah. So, there is not enough to go around in this world, and I truly believe we all have a place in it, even though we sometimes get territorial with our toys in the sandbox that we're playing in. So, when I think about competition, usually when the groups that I'm working with, where that kind of conflict comes a little bit more is like, public land agencies trying to do something, and the local community is like really not cool with that, or their members, who are really not cool with that, and so on. So dealing with that competition and conflict, one thing that we talk about is to be doing what we call community analysis. And this is actually one of those first steps. If you are in that place where you're trying to figure out who should I partner with, or who out there is doing stuff, this is what you want to do. We used to call it stakeholder analysis. We're moving away from that kind of colonial language, so we're calling it community analysis. And it's basically a process of looking around you and asking who's doing what, who else is out there, and then asking the people you've asked to, keep asking that, who else should I talk to, right? This is also how you figure out who should be around the table as you're forming that vision. So one of the things we talk about with community analysis is, bunch of people come to mind, right? Like, oh, who's going to help us get the program done, and who has resources, and who are the funders, and who are the doers, and all that. What we often don't think about in that circle of community are who could be impacted or might perceive that they are impacted by what we're doing. Who is opposed to what we are doing, and who is competing with what we are doing. I don't know if that's helpful, but sometimes I think just first of all, recognizing who your competition is likely to be, that is important. I think that's an important part of doing your scan, your community scan. And then, maybe if there's an opportunity to have a conversation where you can acknowledge kind of what I consider like the meta conversation, right? We're very used to having like the conversation about the what's, but we don't talk a lot about the how things are happening. So that's a place where I think maybe some meta conversation would be useful. If it's a group you can like even get into a room with to have a conversation, which maybe not, but yeah, sort of. So thinking about where would be, let's lean into that for a minute, okay? So resolving that conflict. What's going to be necessary to have that conversation? And by the way, these are tools you can use in like your family and everything else, like it's all totally applicable. So the first thing is, how are you going to create safety for both parties, right? And that might require being on neutral ground. That might require, calling on a third-party convener. We often see that like a community foundation or a church leader sometimes can be that kind of neutral party to help groups that are in conflict come together. Of course, there's people who have training in that as well, mediation or conflict resolution. But thinking about that safety, what's going to create that safety, setting some ground rules for how the conversation is going to happen, right? We're going to focus on the issues, we're going to be hard on the problem and soft on the people, right? So no personal attacks, we're just going to talk about this issue here. And then kind of using those good communication tools where we are making sure to stay neutral in our language. We're not accusing or, naming, shaming, blaming, complaining, all of those things. Instead, we need to reframe. That's what we want to do. So, and that often starts with an I statement. I've noticed that we seem to be, having feelings of competition. I'm noticing some feelings of competition here, and I'm curious about where that's coming from. What would you share with us about how you see our organization and what we do and how we play in this space as compared to how you see your organization? Where are places where maybe instead of competition, we could think about aligning or dividing and conquering, things like that. So maybe that's a way to lean into that conversation. Thank you for letting me riff on that for just a minute. Is that helpful? A little bit? Okay. And let me just say, who has a comment that you'd like to share about that if this is resonating with your experience? Can you run the mic over there? Thank you.
I think part of what I'm pulling from what you're saying and the question asked, your response to it, is a lot about leadership, style, and capacity, and type. And what it makes me think is like we're talking about a very informed and ideal approach to things, but that's not truly where everybody is currently at in their leadership. Mm-hmm. And then so for me that seems, it's one of those things, right? Like maybe it's the oxygen mask deal metaphor, but it's like you can't really be in a healthy partnership with others until you're kind of doing okay yourself. And so for me, I see that a big part is being like leadership has to be in the position to where it can start to have those really emotionally intelligent conversations before asking other people to be a part of it. You have to give up some of that ownership. You have to give up some of the tightly held strings to be able to trust, to be able to actually collaborate. And so that was my next thing is how do we talk about challenges for leadership to get to that point?
Wow, that's a great question and such excellent comments. Thank you so much for sharing that. I agree with everything that you're saying there. Hold on to that question because I may lose track of it in my little rabbit mind, and I don't want to lose track of it. So you're so right, and our organizations have a relationship and a history, and there may be trauma in that history. The people I work with do a lot of work with tribes and indigenous communities, and there is so much trauma in that history, and it is not something that we can just jump over, right? We need to acknowledge it. We need to hold time and space to sit with that hurt and that harm. And we need to figure out a better way to work together and move forward that is truly, where it used to be the public, agencies I work with would talk about public lands management. Even now, they're moving away from the word management to the word co-stewardship. Because from a Native Nations perspective, in many cases, we're not managing the land is managing us. So that requires a serious mindset shift, what I just shared in that example. Likewise, partnership and collaboration is a mindset shift. It requires you to be willing to give up some of that control, some of that closeness of identity, right? And trust and have faith that you can be strong in what you're doing while also allowing your partner to be strong in what they're doing. So we talk about collaborative leadership, if I can just riff off this for a minute again. Gary Barrett, Director of the National Partnership Office of the U.S. Forest Service, so someone who's fairly high up there in his leadership career, right? He says, if I go into a meeting with a new partner and I have an hour, I'm going to spend 45 minutes asking them about their family and where they come from and what's home to you and what does your community look like and what needs are you seeing and how do you think the Forest Service could be of use here? And then the last 15 minutes, we'll conclude our business just like that. Wow, that is a serious shift from what you might have been hearing from other leaders at other times and places, right? So Gary would say, your first step is to bring your whole self into the room and engage the other person wholly with empathy and really listen to where they're coming from and what their organization's about, what they need. Then, how are you inviting that other partner to come to the table as a peer? As a peer. We were talking about the power dynamics, right? There's always going to be weird power dynamics in partnerships as well. And so we got to do our best to try to level that playing field, because whether someone is bringing 10 volunteers or $10,000 to our program, both of those are needed. And so part of our job is to kind of look out for where those power dynamics get out of whack and try to help make sure everyone is feeling heard, everyone has the opportunity to have their voices be part of that conversation. How are we reaching out with our hand to invite participation? Then we have, how are we working to be savvy in building a communication scheme, in fostering cooperation, in the actual doing of the work? How are we creating a collaborative process, right? That's what we would call FIT, fair, inclusive, and transparent, so that everyone feels they are respected in that process. And the process itself is effective at getting people together to go figure out how to do stuff. And then finally, how are we leveraging and sharing resources? And then recognizing that each partner has value, each partner is bringing something to the table, as well as the collective work that we're doing, the recognizing of the importance of that work. Now, you had a follow-on question, which has completely escaped my mind, and so I'm hoping you held on to it. Had to do with leadership.
Yeah, I think the core of it was just. Sorry. Yeah, at the core of it, it was just about, because we're already starting with that position of getting to the ideal space for how you would enter
Right.
into a relationship of collaboration, but how getting someone's self or an entity to the place where they can do that, and having that initial conversation of, and I think leadership, like there's named leadership styles, and I think for people to know what type of leader they are and have that honesty up front helps them either know what that might look like for them or how they might need to shift their natural tendencies and that whole mess of everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, and I really appreciate your noting, like these are kind of ideals that I'm sharing with you, right? And so we can always strive to them. Are we going to achieve them? Not always. One thing that you brought to my mind is sometimes the challenge that we're facing is with the leader of our organization, feeling like they need to put their stake in the ground, this is our nonprofit, and their elbows out, right? Like, this is our territory. And so sometimes the challenge of collaboration is working within your own organization. Maybe it's your executive, your board directors or something who are feeling territorial in that way. I think, part of that, I'm going to go back a slide. I think this is part of the figuring out the alignment and goodness of fit too, which I'll get to in a moment. Yeah.
As we're talking, in some ways, we're socialized to be at the top of the pyramid.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it shows its face in so many ways, in so many levels.
Yeah.
And that spills over into our service organizations.
Yes.
And some of our philosophies, some of our foundational beliefs build on, we have to be at the top of the pyramid.
Right.
And I'm just saying that. And you know, it's a deep attitude. It's a deep attitude.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I think there's many ways in which we're socialized to be competitive rather than collaborative. And sometimes that's okay. We have a chart that we like to use when we teach conflict management. I'm just going to draw it for you. Here we go. This is the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Resolution Instrument, I think is what it's called, the TKI Index. Okay, this is really simple, but I love it. You can use it when you talk about negotiation, you can use it when you talk about conflict management, but it also just points to the fact that we have different strategies at different times, right, for what we're doing. So if you imagine on these two axes here, going up and going out, we have, this is how important is the relationship, and this one is how important is the outcome. How hard do you need to advocate for that? Okay, sometimes this is also called assertiveness and relationship. So right in the middle, we have compromise. This is often what we're doing, right? But the problem with compromise is it's a split, right? So I get some, you get some, but neither of us gets most or all of what we're actually looking for. But we compromise a lot, and that's a perfectly fine strategy in a number of situations. Over here, we have avoidance, okay? So if the relationship doesn't matter that much to me, and I don't need any particular outcome, you know, I'm on the road driving and somebody zooms past me and the road rage hits, I'm like, I'm just gonna avoid that. No reason to engage, right? Up here, we have what has sometimes been called competition. Sometimes it's also being direct or direction. So in the community I work in, for example, if a wildland fire breaks out, I really want that fire captain to come and be very direct, right? It's not that he doesn't care about the people who are there, just the opposite. But the fact is, it is super important to get the right outcome in that moment. So in any kind of crisis, we're going to be directive. But it's also the times when we need to compete, you know, and we compete within our own organizations. We have a certain amount of budget, right? I want this much for my program, you want that much for your program. Sometimes we're competing because there's so much trust in that relationship, right, that we can go ahead and advocate hard for what we need, right? And we'll still be friends at the end of the day. It's work, we'll leave it at work and walk away. Okay, over here we have the area that I live in, which is accommodation. We also, by the way, this is kind of cool because it helps us understand our native styles. This is my native style, always. Always gonna prioritize relationship over outcome. Problem with that, I'm not always advocating for my staff or what they need as well as I should. And when people walk over me, I bend and I bend and I bend until finally I snap back, and then everybody's like, whoo, where'd that come from? So accommodation, though, perfectly fine strategy for certain situations. And then finally we have collaborate. The relationship is important, and so is the outcome. And so we gotta figure out that win-win, win-win-win strategy that's gonna work for everyone. Okay. I went a little bit off board there. But part of the reason I brought that up in relation to this is clarifying your own purpose and needs and knowing what you do well, I think is the first step in finding partners and finding partners with alignment. You have to know who you are and what you do really well and be able to tell other people that story. And it's also maybe part of talking about what you don't do, right? Or where those gaps are that you're trying to fill. So you can see up here, this is a game called, you know, Guess Who, if you know that game. So this is the Guess Who are your partners. But just to touch on a couple of other points on this slide, when you're trying to find your partners, you know, first thing you want to do is like That community analysis we talked about. Ask who's out there. Ask the person that you're talking to, who else should I be talking to? Because they have their own social and professional network, and this is how we find people, right? Look on the internet by all means, but that's not always that useful. Go where partners gather. Go to their community events or their gatherings, whatever those might be. Have that conversation where you're exploring, okay, maybe we're competing in this area over here, but where do we have common ground? How many people care about young people? Raise your hand. How many people care about young people having career opportunities in the place where they live? Right? Look at all the common ground we have. We don't even work in the same field, but that's the place where we can meet together, right? So take the time to explore that common ground, and that requires curiosity. That requires seeing people as whole people and getting beyond the title or the role or the organization and saying, tell me about your hidden assets. Tell me something that you love, that you're good at, and that we can find connection on. Keep asking who, and of course we'll get to the shared vision is all. There is no clock in this room. Can you give me a time check? Thank you. All right, gonna move on oh, did you have a question? No, okay, stretching. Oops, we're gonna skip this one. Okay, 4:30, and we gotta wrap at 4:55, right? We're good. Okay, this is a concept, again, it's not rocket science, but boy, is this something that we sometimes forget to put time and attention to. Partner culture awareness. In this case, in this instance, my use of the word culture comes from business language, and it has to do with the organizational culture, okay? We should also pay very close attention to the other cultures that our partners and the individual members of those organizations bring into the room. I am not trying to suggest that we ignore that. I am saying please add to that investing some time in educating yourself about your partner's mission, their practices, their traditions. How do they celebrate? How do they gather? How do they talk about the work that they do? Their governance. How do they make decisions? When does their board get together? If you're trying to form an agreement, you might need to allow 6 months for that to happen, maybe 9, maybe 12, right? Because both sides, legal counsel has to get into that, and the decision makers have to get into that, probably has to go in front of the board, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? This is an area where partnership with federal and state agencies, we often see really misalignment just out of ignorance with nonprofits, right? Is that they don't understand each other's fiscal years are on different cycles and when they should, all that kind of stuff. You've lived it. Financial structure and capacity, not all nonprofits are the same, as you know well, and institutional history. And to me, that also includes what is the history of our two organizations. And if you can, dig into that a little bit, because you don't want to go in blind. And at the same time, that history doesn't necessarily need to dictate how you move forward together in the future, right? So always keep it that open-mindedness about what's possible now. How can we move from here forward, given where we are? So take the time to learn about your partner's culture, their organizational culture, and be an educator out there. It's not just about asking them, but you need to tell them about your own organization so they understand how you work and what you care about and who you work with, all that stuff. Okay. This is, again, pretty common sense. We like to think about the life cycle of partnerships or collaboratives as the life cycle of a monarch butterfly. So I would like to do a little raise of hands here again, if you would. How many of you are right at the beginning of something? You have the seed of an idea, you think you want to do something, maybe you've talked to a few partners, but you're just getting started on this particular project or venture. We have a few people who are in that phase. Thank you. How many of you are caterpillars who have gotten some folks together, had some conversation about why are you here and why am I here and what could we do together? You're starting to form the vision of that partnership, or maybe you already have a vision statement and you're beginning to talk about how are we going to work together. You have a concept for the partnership. So you're in that caterpillar phase. A few people there as well. All right. And you, by the way, could be in several places at the same time with the same partner. Okay, so one example, right? Chrysalis. If anyone has ever heard of the Bruce Tuckman model of group formation, he talks about forming, storming, norming, performing, and transforming, which overlays on this really well. Guess what? This is the super stormy transformative phase, just as it is for a butterfly. Goes in a caterpillar, comes out a butterfly, right? This is where you are figuring it all out. It will be stormy, there will be disagreement and conflict, so bring your good skills, and it's super, super productive. So this is where you're talking and figuring out roles and responsibilities. Yes, I would have that conversation. How are we going to recognize each other? How are we going to communicate with each other? What's our action plan? What are the risks potentially involved in this partnership? And how might we mitigate those risks, right? What if it goes well? Great, but take some time to talk about what if it doesn't, and what might take you off track. How many of you are in the chrysalis messy, messy, messy phase? Yeah, several people. Okay, and then many of you are also over here in the butterfly phase. You are actively performing and flying. You've got your programs off the ground. Maybe you're thinking you've actually done some recognition and communication about the value and the impact of the partnership. Maybe you're doing some great evaluation. How many folks are flying? Okay, all right. And that leads us, it's a cycle, right back to good endings and new beginnings, hopefully. Sometimes endings, like the end of a partnership, it's okay. Partnerships don't last forever necessarily. Sometimes they transform. A couple of things I want to say about this life cycle. Again, this model can help provide you and your partners with clarity. If you talk about where are we at right now in the life cycle, the reason that's important is do the right things at the right time. And by doing that, you will lay a strong foundation for sustaining your partnership. What we hear in the stories that I get to hear about is if you skip a step here, you will probably end up having to go back. So if you didn't have the opportunity to really hash out a shared vocabulary so that when I say partnership, you and I are on the same page of what that means, or when I say restoration, or something else, you and I are on the same page, right? We may have to find our way back to that. Also, quite naturally, like any life cycle, you may have things that hiccup and come your way. How many people have experienced the loss of a charismatic leader in your organization or partnership? Right? Someone who was like the champion for your program. Yeah, it happens on a regular basis. Or how many of you have had a staff person or someone you work with who's really key to your program volunteer turnover in the last 2 years? Okay, so when that change happens, you have to bring people back around the life cycle, right? You have to inform them, help get them on board about what's this vision, where are we going, and so on. So that's kind of what I want to say about the partnership life cycle. Let me pause and see if there's any questions and thoughts. Yeah.
You might have said this already, but what does R&D stand for?
Research and development.
Thank you.
That's kind of business language. Yeah. All right, I'm going to roll on here because there's a few other things that I'd like to share with you. I'm actually going to skip this one. I'm just going to say one paragraph about this. There is an awesome partnership in my field of conservation that formed in San Francisco called One TAM. It's around Mount Tamalpais, which is right across the Golden Gate Bridge in the Bay Area. And the Bechtel Foundation funded a fantastic series of case studies about how this group came together. They very intentionally started small with only 5 partners. They took their time to walk through these first 6 steps together. So defining the need for the partnership, figuring out if they were ready, creating that common vision, then going out and talking to the public about here's what we're trying to do with this vision, do you want to join? Agreeing to goals, and finally they actually did sign an MOU with that partnership. So there's excellent case study. By the way, all these things that you see, the credits on the bottom, they are all linked at one of the final slides of this presentation. So no need to write them down. They're all hyperlinked. Here's what I want to share to you today about this. One of the questions that came up in the registration forms was, when do I need an agreement? When do I need a formal agreement? Okay, and the answer is when you're trying to go big, when you need to create accountability, when you want to have a better way to talk about rules and responsibilities, when you need to figure out your collective impact. Those are all reasons. When you're sharing resources is often a time when you're going to decide you need to put something down on paper, right? Like we're going to, whatever that might be. So what the One TAM partners found, and they did actually measure this. Yes, you can actually measure trust. Google trust ecology. I guarantee you'll have a good time with that. Trust between partners increased by 80%. 80% among the partners. Resource sharing increased between 100 and 400% after signing that agreement, because there was certainty, there was clarity, there was understanding, and there was accountability. They were much more willing to share resources, and they were able to achieve that greater efficiency. I do want to point out that agreements do not always have to be legally binding documents. Maybe your agreement is actually a charter, a partnership charter, where you're documenting kind of the intention of your work together, right? So this is how we intend to work together. We're not taking it to our leaders to sign and make it a formal, right? That being said, anyone who was in the Nonprofit Financials 101 this morning heard the conversation about how our funders are often, our philanthropic funders are often looking for, do you have an MOU with your partners? So it is often worth taking the time and the effort to get that signed. Most of all, it will help you, again, have clarity about who's doing what and give you a document you can go back to over time. Okay. I'm actually going to skip this one, I think, because I want to make sure. Thanks. What was that? 447. Thank you. Yep. Moving along. I'll just say this. A couple of sentences. It's worth touching on. Okay. I love this triangle of satisfaction. It can be used several ways. You can use it as you're kind of heading in that caterpillar phase and figuring out how are we going to work together, what's our collaborative process or our concept, to think about how are you balancing all these very necessary components for sustaining partnership. Your North Star is your purpose, that's your shared vision, right? And around that we have the people. Do we have the people that we need to accomplish the purpose that we're trying to do? We have our process. Is it fair, inclusive, and transparent? Are we working peer-to-peer? And we have our product. What is that outcome or that ultimate work in the world that we're trying to do? Inevitably, in a partnership or collaborative effort, you will go off track. I can guarantee it. This can also be used for conflict, diagnosing sources of conflict as well. So I love this little handout that the US Forest Service put together. Their collaboration cadre does great work. And they made the analogy with a car alignment, right? So when you get out of alignment, they have a lovely handout with a series of questions you can ask yourself, which includes some of the ones you see on this slide. Do we actually have the right people? Maybe we're missing some folks around the table. Maybe our purpose has shifted, our vision has shifted a little bit, and so now we need to find different people, or we need to adjust our process. Maybe the products are not going to be what we thought they were going to be right at the start. So all of those things to consider. So check out that if you're trying to find your way back to alignment. I'm going to return to something I said first off this morning. Y'all are rocking it in the assessment world. Wow. The very first time I Googled partnership assessment, I found like 20 tools for partnership assessment from the health industry. So if you don't know these tools, go out and have a great Googling time figuring them out. First of all, so an assessment happens in different places in our life cycle in partnership, right? So first of all, when you're trying to figure out, are we even ready to partner? Like ourselves, individually, are we ready to partner? This wonderful tool, the Nonprofit Readiness for Health Partnership from the Nonprofit Finance Fund, highly recommend. Go check it out. And then there's the question of how are we going to build our partnership? I have to let you know, it's been a decade now that I've been using the tools from the Community Toolbox at the University of Kansas. And it wasn't until I was coming here, this is my first time in Kansas, that I was like, oh my gosh, this is the source of all of that great information. They have an extensive, very well thought out series of supports for any stage you're at in your partnership or collaborative. If you don't know about them, go check them out, including this tool for creating and maintaining partnerships. Then we come to one that maybe you're familiar with. So now we're into the question of, we're ready to partner, we're building our partnership, but how healthy is our relationship? We're starting to crawl and move and fly together, but how well is that going? So specific to the health industry, partnership assessment tool for health and the addenda, which addresses increased diversity and inclusion questions produced by the Nonprofit Finance Fund and the Center for Healthcare Strategies. This is also known as PATH, if you hear people talk about PATH, Partnership and Assessment Tool for Health. One you may not know from the Wilder Foundation is their Collaboration Factors Inventory. This is like a 4-page checklist you can do in like 10 minutes, or you can do it online. You can do it with your partners. And it just takes you through a series of questions about, where are we at? Because we often think about how are we assessing how well we're doing at achieving the outcomes of our partnership, right? We all get that. Are we doing what we said we would do? But more rarely do we ask ourselves the question of how well are we doing together? How healthy is our relationship? Just as important to ask. And it doesn't have to be a tool. It could just be calling up your partner and saying, let's meet over tea, and like have an honest conversation about how's this working for you? Where's it not working for you? And then finally, we do get to that, what is the actual impact of our partnership? What are we accomplishing together? So if you were in the session just prior, they talked about theory of change, logic models. I want to give you one tool related to that. And this is called the tierless logic model. I love this resource because for most people, when you say a logic model, they fall asleep or burst into tears, and I would be right up there with them. It's like, oh, please don't make me. This sounds like so painful. But it's actually just a series of questions, and you can ask yourself these questions reflectively, or you can do it in a workshop with your partners. It's as simple as, and I do want you to know, where does it start? It starts all the way at the end with what is the impact, the change, the vision, the world you're trying to create, right? If we got it right, what would it look like? And then from there, so you don't tell your partners or your meeting members that you're like working on the impact. You just ask that question instead. And then who are we trying to help? And then in order to get there, what needs to change? So you work your way through these sets of questions, 1 through 8, and then you go away behind the scenes and you put it into a nice little logic model, right? And then you come back and say, guess what? We just created a logic model for how we're going to get from here to there. Logic model at its most basic, if we do this, then that will happen. And making sure that those two things are realistically connected, that A is actually going to lead to B. This is one you are probably not familiar with that came out of that incredible 1TAM research that was done. This is called the Partnership Impact Model. And the kind of most powerful thing to me about this model is that it finally gives us language we've never really had before to talk about some of the most valuable and intangible aspects of partnership impact, which is that when we partner, we gain connectivity, we build trust. And if we do those foundational things, then we are able to add capacity. We suddenly know each other much better. And that knowledge allows us to share resources and be more creative and innovative in our approaches. And when we do that, then what the 1TAM partnership found was, okay, you get to some of the impacts you might have expected, right? Okay, we're able to do our mission and accomplish our things more efficiently at a greater scale. But they did not expect that what they would experience was a 200% to 300% increase in their social network and their connected partner network, this incredible expanded connectivity that they suddenly had within a few years. They did not expect that their individual organizations and their network as a whole became more collaborative in their mindset and in their practices. And they did not expect that their individual organizations actually became more effective and resilient as a result of being part of this partnership. So there are several resources related to this. I encourage you to dive deeper in this. And I just want to say, one of the things that my colleague, I actually get to work with Lee Goldberg, who was a co-author of this work, she's done other research as well on what it takes to sustain partnerships. And what she found was, first of all, sustaining partnerships taking clear fiscal ownership and a coordinating or organizing backbone, right? When you're partnering, you're working in the space between your organizations. And at a certain point, you may need to really invest in some way or other in the coordination of that thing that's between you, right? You have to nurture the collaborative itself. So clear fiscal ownership, and maybe it's one organization within the group that's being that backbone. Maybe you actually add, everybody contributes a quarter to a staff person who's going to run the collaborative. Dedicated administrative and fundraising capacity, no surprise to anyone here. A compelling brand, an inspiring vision, and fanatically, that's her word, fanatically capturing your collective impact, your partnership impact. That is what will be so persuasive in a grant application or other, to your members, et cetera. So, and this model can help you find new ways of talking about that beyond how many people came to our programs, right? Where you can actually talk about the amount of trust between our partners has increased by X amount. Okay. I am going to just note that all of these resources that you have seen and several others are hyperlinked in this presentation. Please go check them out if you are interested. And do we have any time? 3 minutes for any final questions or comments. You've been so patient. I know we probably didn't get to all these other questions. Again, I'm going to take a picture of this, and if this was your question, come and find me in the partner pathway. I'd be happy to chat about it. Final words from anyone here. Be happy to hear it. Was this useful? Okay. I covered it all, yeah, in 50 minutes. Yeah. Well, I will finish then by just sharing a very sincere thanks to all of you for the work that you are doing. I feel honored daily that it's my job to get to support the people who are doing the incredible work that you are doing. This is my jam, so if you want to come and follow up, I'd be more than happy to do that, and really appreciate your time and your excellent questions today. I will continue to think about those as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.